Hello and welcome back everyone to the UPSC journey. My name is Babita Rani, you're the Hindu analysis faculty at UPSC journey. In today's session, we are going to cover the complete Hindu analysis for 13th of May 2026. This session is going to be very helpful for your upcoming UPSC exam. After the completion of this session, you can download PDF from our Telegram channel. The link is in the description box. So first we start with our first article, and first article is about appointment process of CBI directors. So we all know that CBI is an executive body, and this article is talking about the selection process or the appointment process for the CBI directors. So the article is about Rahul Gandhi, the leader of opposition, called this whole CBI appointment process as a biased move. So this appointment of next CBI director for the Central Bureau of Investigation, which is in this, there will be a selection committee, and this selection committee will consist of PM, then the leader of opposition, and Chief Justice of India. But CBI was established in 1963. It came into existence from the resolution of Ministry of Home Affairs based on the recommendation of Santhanam Committee. So it's an executive body which came into force under the recommendation of Santhanam Committee to prevent corruption. We all know that it's an executive body. It's not a constitutional body, means it's not mentioned in the constitution. Neither it's created by any law. So it's an executive body created by executive order or by simple order. It's created by an executive order. It's not created by any constitution or not created by any law. So it's executive in nature, very important. Second, it was established in 1963 and it came under Ministry of Home Affairs. So these 3 points are very important from your exam point of view. And it's based on the recommendation of Santhanam Committee. It operates under the Department of Personal Trainings, like under Ministry of DOPT, Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievance and Pensions. Its function is to anti-corruption investigation against central government employees. So it look out for anti-corruption, economic crisis, like if there is any bank fraud, any financial scam or any cyber crime, then CBI can intervene and can have power in a hand. Then it's power in special crimes, like offenses like terrorism, organized crime or multi-state crimes. Means it has special powers in cases of special crimes, if they're crimes like terrorism, organized crime, or if they're cases of rape victim. So CBI can intervene in all the special cases. Case transferred by, or it handle the case which are transferred by central government, state government with consent from the state government. As we all know that we see that the government should transfer this case to the CBI. So government has power to transfer any case to the CBI, or the state government can also transfer case to the CBI, but with prior consent from the from central government, or the case transferred by the courts. It's a license, Interpol license. It's interconnection between CBI is an interconnection between nodal agency of Interpol in India. So it's a nodal agency between CBI for the crime prevention. So Interpol, CBI is a nodal agency for Interpol in India. It's a common body, or it's a mediator. I would say mediator for Interpol in India. So appointment of CBI director, the process of appointment appointed by central government on the recommendation of high powered committee. Means CBI director will be appointed by the central government on the recommendation of a three-membered powered committee, and this committee will consist Prime Minister, who will be a chairman, then a leader of opposition in Lok Sabha, and Chief Justice of India or any Supreme Court judge appointed by Chief Justice of India. So there will be a three-membered committee which comprise or which consist of PM, leader of opposition and Chief Justice of India. And on this recommendation of this committee, the appointment of CBI director will be done. It's very important that tenure of the CBI director is 2 years and it's fixed in nature. So it can be directly asked that the tenure of CBI director is for 5 years. No, the tenure of CBI director is for 2 years and it can be extended up to 5 years in special cases. So in general scenarios, the tenure is only of 2 years, but it can be extended up to 5 years in special cases. So very important from your exam point of view. And removal, same process as appointment, it require approval of the committee. So as we have seen that for the appointment, we need a 3 members powered committee. In the same way, the removal process also require the approval of the committee. Clear? So this is about CBI when it was established under the resolution of Home Affairs Ministry on the recommendation of Santhanam Committee. It's executive in nature, very important. It came under DOPT Ministry and Ministry of Public Grievances and Pension. Functions, we all know that it look into the corruption matters, economic crimes, special crimes, and the crimes or the cases transferred by the central government, or it's act as a liaison between Interpol and CBI in India. Again, the appointment consists of 3-membered body, which is Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, and the CGI of India. Tenure is 2 years and it can be extended up to 5 years, and removal for same require approval of the committee. Looking into second article is about retail inflation. Is how this inflation is increased over this 13 month and high of 3.5%. So there's a inflation, there's a retail inflation. This talking about article. There's an inflation, like we have seen inflation in food items as well as a higher price. At least we observe at restaurants, they passed a higher fuel price to the consumer. Because if there's a fuel price increase, then it will going to hamper our restaurants, and it will ultimately going to be increase in retail inflation. So the consumer have to pay the more for the same amount. So this article is about how inflation has reached of 4% in April. First of all, about retail inflation. What is CPI? CPI is Consumer Price Index. So Consumer Price Index measure a retail inflation based on the changes in price of baskets of goods and services. So CPI, so we have two measure, like we measure inflation in two ways. One is CPI, that is Consumer Price Index, and another is Wholesale Price Index. So CPI is which consists of change in prices of goods of baskets plus services. Means it consists in both goods and services. So it's called CPI. Where Wholesale Price Index is only considered goods. Correct. So first of all, it track the retail inflation based on the changes in price of goods and services. It reflects the cost of living for households. It actually tells you that what is current inflation in India and how it affecting the cost of living for households. Who measures CPI? CPI is measured by National Statistics Office, that is NSO. So NSO measure CPI, and NSO comes under MOSPI Mantralaya. And MOSPI Ministry, that is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So it released a combined CPA. One is CPA combined. So it released a report of in which CPA is combined for both rural and urban areas, and also separately CPI for urban area and CPI for rural area. So very important that NSO released reports, or means this NSO release of this National Statistics Office release data for combined CPI and CPI for urban and rural areas. Very important. But if we like talking about industrial workers and agriculture workers and rural labor, I have seen that NSO Statistics Officer MOSPI department released CPI for both combined, means for rural and urban, and it will also release a separate CPI for urban and CPI for rural. But very important is that when there's a CPI regarding industrial worker, CPI regarding agriculture worker, and CPI regarding rural labor, then it is released by a labor bureau under Ministry of Labor and Employment. So Ministry of Labor and Employment released reports regarding CPI for industrial workers, CPI for agriculture workers, and CPI for rural labor, released by Labor Bureau, which comes under Ministry of Labor and Employment. Very important. Second, the key changes in CPI, that the base year for CPI is now 2024. Base year changed from 2011 to 2024. Very important that the base year of CPI has changed from 2011 to 2014. Very important. And okay, so if we compare the consumer price index, that is CPI, and wholesale price index, then we'll find that CPI consists price changes at retail plus consumer level. Means CPI consists both goods and services, where wholesale price only consists goods. The key difference is this. So it measures the price change at retail level as well as at consumer level, where WPI measure price change at wholesale or at producer level, means not at the consumption level but at the production level. CPI count retail or cost of living inflation, means what is increased cost of inflation and a retail inflation, where wholesale price index measure wholesale or producer inflation, means inflation at the production side, where CPI count inflation at the retail side. It come under MOSPI department, come under MOSPI ministry, and WPI is released by Office of Economic Advisor under Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Very important. The WPI is released under Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Office of Economic Advisor, where CPI is released by NSO under MOSPI. Very important. Okay, the next article is regarding that China's foreign minister is set to skip BRICS meeting in Delhi. So this is whole news that Chinese foreign minister is going to skip, means a BRICS meeting in which is going to be held in Delhi. So why it is a news that it's going to miss meeting in Delhi, because stating scheduling reason, because it provided reason that the absence coincide with US President Donald Trump visit to the China, means US President Donald Trump is going to visit China, and that's why we kept Yang Ying in Beijing. So this is a reason of not attending the BRICS meeting, which is going to be held in Delhi. Important point is that India is currently chair of BRICS in 2026. I mean, India is holding the chairmanship of BRICS in 2026. Important. India assumed the BRICS chairmanship on 1st January 2026 by succeeding Brazil. As in 2025, Brazil was the chairman, but in 2026, India is chairman or having a chairmanship of BRICS in 2026, and India is going to host 18th BRICS Summit in 2026 in New Delhi under the theme, and the theme for this is Building for Resilience, Innovation, Cooperation and Sustainability. It's very important that India is going to have a 18th BRICS Summit at Delhi, and India is going to chair this summit, and the theme is Building for Resilience, Innovation, Cooperation and Sustainability. So like if we look into the BRICS formation and expansion, the first meeting held in 2006, the first meeting of BRICS by foreign ministers. The first summit held at Russia in 2009, and there was after that the founding members Brazil, Russia, India, and China were the founding members. Means South Africa was not part. And after 2009 meeting at Russia in 2010, South Africa joined, making it as BRICS. So originally it was BRIC only. Then in 2010, S was added, that was South Africa. So as of now, new member of BRICS in 2024 who joined Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran. Very important that Iran is part of BRIC, and that's why maybe the USA is trying to pull the members from this BRIC summit. So Iran, very important, is part of this BRIC summit. Saudi Arabia, UAE become full-time member in January 2024, and the latest most addition is Indonesia, which joined in January 2025 and making it 11 members in 2025, making it 11 membered body. So as of now, BRICS consists 11 members. So this about like how China, like how USA is going to manipulate the BRICS countries, and it successfully make it possible to skip a BRIC meeting by keeping the officials in Beijing. So India is currently a BRIC chairman, and let's see how this is going to impact the geopolitical in upcoming times. Okay, so next article is very important, and let's talk about India's workforce participation. India's workers population ratio has climbed since 2022. Means there is an increase in workforce participation since 2022, and this data is released by Labor Force Survey, Periodic Labor Force Survey 2025, and which comes under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. That's again Ministry of MOSPI. Very important. It shows that all over labor force representation at all the stages is 44.9. Means if we consider the all over workforce participation, that is around 44%. And this show a different data for different categories like this. Look into the first chart. This chart show that there is a workforce participation based on the gender and on the economy. Like you can see in the rural area, the male work participation is 58%. And if you look into the urban area, male workforce participation is 59%. Where you look into the female in urban rural area, there's 34% women engaged in workforce participation. Means for rural area, more women are engaged in workforce, and there are only 22% of female in urban area who are actually into the labor force. So, like India's National Statistics Office (NSO) released the Periodic Labor Force Survey Annual Report 2025. This annual report was released by MOSPI, that is Ministry of Program Status Implementation Program 2026. The labor force participation. Why it is a news? Because India's National Statistics Office, that is NSO, has released the Periodic Labor Force Survey Annual Report 2025. This annual report is released by MOSPI, that is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, in March 26. The labor force participation rate. So first of all, we have to understand that what is labor force participation, because everyone cannot be considered under a labor force. So it consider a percentage of person in the labor force which are working, the force which is actually working, or the labor which is seeking for the availability of the work. Means in labor force participation, there's a person who is working or seeking to availability of work is considered in the total population of the labor force. Second, a workers population ratio is a percentage of employed person in the total population. Means the total population out of which the total employed person in the population will be considered as a workers population ratio. Very important from exam point of view. Third, the unemployment rate. The percentage of person who are unemployed among the person in the labor force. These are unemployed person among the person in the labor force. These are the percentage in the total labor force which are actually unemployed will be considered as a unemployment rate and will be considered under unemployment rate. So we have a one definition by ILO, International Labour Organization, that person involving being jobless while actively seeking unemployment, actively seeking employment. So according to ILO definition, a jobless person is one who is actively seeking employment, means the person is willing to do work but is not getting job. That person is actively seeking for employment, and that person will come under labor force participation. Second, the important distinction that unemployment, that total unemployment or the unemployment will not directly equal to joblessness, because those are not seeking work will not be counted as an unemployed, because those who are not actually seeking for it, how they can be considered as an unemployed, or how they can be considered under unemployment category. So it's very clear distinction that unemployment doesn't is equal to joblessness. Means if you are not willing to do a work, then you will not be considered as an unemployed, because unemployment will be considered only when you are actually looking for work and you are not getting that work. That's it. So those who are not seeking work are not counted as an unemployed. So these are the four definition, very important from your exam point of view. So first is it released by MOSPI Ministry, that is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. First, labor force participation, very important, those who are working and seeking to availability for work. Total work population who are actually percentage employed out of total population. Unemployed, the person who are unemployed among the person who in the actual labor force. And according to ILO, unemployment is not equal to joblessness. Means those who are not seeking for work will not be counted as a unemployment. So, like, as we all know that this data change very frequent, but for general understanding, just keep in mind that according to labor force participation, all over labor workforce participation is 44.9%. That's stable since 2023. The male labor force participation in rural areas 58% means in rural area 58.8% male are into workforce, where in urban area 59.7% male are into workforce. And for female in rural 34.6% into the working labor force, where in urban only 22% are into the working force. So it can be asked that in rural areas, women workforce participation is less. No, wrong. In rural area, women workforce participation is higher as comparison to urban areas. So it's key fact that women are more into the workforce participation in rural areas as comparison to urban areas. Okay, so next article. This article is very interesting, I would say. Now, this is about like we have to manage the coexistence of human and wildlife conflict zone. This article is regarding managing coexistence in human wildlife conflict zone. So every time we hear that there's a conflict between human and wildlife, so this article is clearly defining that what are the key reasons of this conflict, what are the major areas of this conflict like Africa, South Asia, Latin America, and the change in this biodiversity, the change in human settlement, and the change in land use is how it impacting the wildlife conflict and how it like actually putting and how it like we have to manage the human wildlife conflicts. So these are some points by through via policies, through a very proactive measure by community participation, we can actually reduce this human wildlife conflict zones. First of all, human wildlife conflict zones are increasing in. So, first of all, why it is in news? Because human wildlife conflicts are increasing in frequency and intensity across continents due to rapid human driven transformation of natural habitat. Because human is naturally transferring human because human wildlife conflicts are increasing in a very high frequency and intensely across continents due to rapid human driven transformation of natural habitats, because we are destroying their habitats. We are actually the cause of this human wildlife conflict is first is expansion of agriculture, because we are expanding our land for agriculture, for mining, for infrastructure into the forest area. So we are actually entering into their natural habitat or into their forest areas for our personal use, for maybe agriculture, for maybe mining, or for infrastructure. Encroachment on wildlife corridors and buffer zone means we are destroying their wildlife corridors. The buffer zone means human activities are actually intervening into the buffer zone, which is ultimately increasing the human wildlife conflicts. There's also a factor of climate change, like erratic rainfall means there's a decrease in rainfall, frequent droughts and floods also cause the loss of natural habitats, and this will increase the human wildlife conflicts. The shrinkage prey base means the carnivores move closer to human settlement because they have lost their prey base. They have like a shrinkage of their prey. So they are now moving to the human settlements because they are not left with any option. So as of now, we have different kinds of zone. First, we have a core zone. Core zone is an area where no human activity is allowed. And it's complete protection zone where no human activity or no human intervention is allowed is known as core zone. Very important. Second, we have a buffer zone. Buffer zone is area with limited regulations and it's eco tourism research and it can be used like for tourism for research, but there should be no harm to that zone and it's have limited access or it have limited regulatory use. Very important. Then we have a transition zone. So first we have a core zone, then we have a buffer zone, and then we have a transition zone. In transition zone, we have a sustainable human activities allowed. Means that activities which are not harmful for the nature, that are not harmful, can be allowed, and that are sustainable in nature. So that activities can be allowed in the transition zone. And then we have an eco-sensitive zone, which have restricted industry and mining near protected areas. In this eco-sensitive zone, we have like natural human activities are allowed, but are restricted for industries and for mining under the near areas. Okay, so this picture is depicting that first we have core zone where no human activity is allowed and it's strictly protected under government. Second, we have a buffer zone. Buffer zone is an area between core zone and transition zone where very limited use is allowed and it can be used for only research for tourism purpose. No other human activities are allowed in buffer zone. Then we have a transition zone. Transition zone is zone where we can allow some limited human activities. Then we have a restricted industry and mining area. Means in restricted area there's no mining, there's no industry. And then we have eco-sensitive zone, which is like an area where natural activities are allowed or permitted. Rising human casualty and economic losses. The rising human casualties and economic loss. We have marginalized communities which are more affected by this conflicts with limited access to compensation. Fragmented governance between forest department, local bodies, and state government. There's no proper coordination to manage this kind of conflicts. So we have fragmented governance in terms of wildlife and human conflict. So we need have a proper bodies. We need have a proper departments which actually look into this matters of human wildlife conflicts. So we have fragmented bodies like forest department, local bodies, and state government. Again, climate change, which intensify this conflicts very frequent. What are the mitigation strategies we can really use to reduce this conflicts? First, the use of solar fencing. In solar fencing, the early warning system and the GPS tracking can really help us to avoid this kinds of conflict in near future. So solar fencing, early warning system, and the GPS tracking can really help to reduce this kind of conflicts. There's need to be have a better policy, means we need a compensation schemes, legal framework for the accountability, means if this kind of any incidents happen, then there should be proper accountability and there should be a proper compensation schemes. There's need of community awareness programs, the participation of governance and tolerance buildings. Means we need a proper policy framework. There should be a proper coordination from the communities, from the government, and from the local residents of that area. So there's need of policy framework that is combined of all. Means we need a proper programs, we need proper implementation of the a system and proper governance of this policies. Very important. Next, we're talking about how India is governing its water resources. Is how we are managing our water resources. This article is saying that we having more than like 4,000 billion cubic metric rainfall annually, but we only use a fraction of it and we are capable of capturing it in a very efficient way. So it showing that we are not utilizing our water resources efficiently. We are not able to manage it. Why it is news? Because India is facing a water scarcity paradox. Means currently we are under water stressed category, and large rainfall, we have a poor capture system and storage and efficiency system. Means India have received a very good amount of rainfall, but we have a poor capturing system. We lack in storage and efficiency of that rainwater. Water availability and stress. Like India has 20% of world population, but it has only 4% of global freshwater resources. So, if you look into the population wise, we are 20% in the world population, but in excess of fresh water resources, we have 4% of total fresh water. Per capita water availability declined from 500 cubic meter to 1400 cubic meter today. Means we have a sharp decline in water availability. The groundwater dependence is very large in India. We all know that 80 to 90% agricultural activities in India are totally depend on groundwater. India is the largest groundwater use globally. Means groundwater user, India is at the top level. So largest groundwater user globally, and we extract nearly 25% of global groundwater. Over extraction is also one problem, which declining water tables, because if there is a continue extraction of water, then there will be a problem of declining of water level, which we already see in part of UP, in part of Punjab, in part of Haryana, where there's a sharp decline in water tables. There's a problem of salinity because of over extraction, because of overuse of water or overuse of groundwater. There's a cause of salinity and the ecological imbalance. And there's going to be have a ecological imbalance because of this over extraction of water. And India is largest groundwater user globally, and we account like 25% of global groundwater. Very important. Next, look into the governance structure. In case of water resources, we have multi levels. Like we have union, state, and local bodies. Means all this are engaged in governance of water resources. It's a multi-level in which union is also responsible, state is also responsible, and local bodies are also responsible. But this multi-level structure forms a very complex structure, and it's very hard to govern the water resources. Key institutes are Ministry of Jal Shakti, Central Water Commission, Central Groundwater Boards. These are the key commissions or key institutes in India which look into the matters of water resources. Jal Ministry, Central Water Commission, Central Groundwater Board. Central Water Commission was considered an executive body. Important. It is established in 1944 as a Central Waterway Irrigation Navigation Commission, and it was later renamed as a CWC, that is Central Water Commission, in 1951. Headquarters in New Delhi, and it attached to the office of Ministry of Jal Shakti, Department of Water Resources and River Development and Ganga Regeneration. So there are like categories according to the water availability, and these are now international standard. So first is India is currently classified as a water stressed country. Means we are water stressed country. This is we are ranging around 1500 cubic meter and below 17 cubic meter. Means we have water availability around 1500 but less than 1700 meter threshold of water stress, but still we are above 1000 cubic meter threshold for absolute water scarcity. Means if there is like less than 1000 cubic meter per capita per year, then we will be under water scarcity. But as of now, we are under water stressed country where we have water availability around 1500 cubic meter, but it below than 700 cubic meter. And if it like less than 500 cubic meter per capita per year, then it will be considered as absolute scarcity. So as of now, we are under water stressed category and ranging like from 500 cubic meter to 700 cubic meter. Now we need to understand what are the reason of this water crisis. So first reason is the reason of this water crisis. First reason is rapid population growth and urbanization. Because of this rapid population growth, there's a continued increase in. So first of all, we have to understand the reason of this water crisis. First is rapid population growth and urbanization. Because for increase in population, there's a more demand of water, and there's the cases of water crisis. Second, urbanization is one of the most important reason behind water crisis, because in the name of urbanization or for the urbanization, we are actually clearing our forest. We are actually destroying our lakes and water resources. There's a decline in per capita water availability, means there is a less water available. Over dependency on groundwater extraction, because 80 to 90% India's agriculture depend on water ground extraction, and that also leading to decline in water tables. Inefficient irrigation practices, like there are some agriculture practices where we overuse water and there's no efficiency in that. We have pollution problem of rivers and lake. We are continuously polluting our rivers and water resources. There's a climate change, because there's erratic rainfall, means there's a sharp decline in rainfall. There's a problem of drought and floods. These are the reasons which are causing water crisis, and the weak enforcement of water laws and fragmented governments in India. So these are some reasons which are causing water crisis in India. I hope you like today's session, and this is about today's topic. So first topic we cover about. Let's do a recap. And first we talk about CBI appointment, like how CBI director should be appointed, and there will be a 3-member committee. After that, we have seen retail inflation, that how this inflation is increasing and how inflation is measured on the basis of PPI and WPI, and CPI is released by National Statistics Office for CPI for rural and urban, and for agriculture labor we have Labor Bureau which releases CPI, and the base year is changed. After that, there's a BRICS meeting in Delhi is going to be held. After that, we have seen the India's workforce participation. There's workforce participation in rural and urban areas, workforce participation females in rural and urban areas. The female working in rural urban area is more as comparison to urban areas. And then we have seen that overall labor force participation. Then we have rural force participation, and then female labor force participation. Then we have seen a wildlife human conflict zones, like how we need to manage human activities so that there will be no conflicts between human and wildlife. The reasons of this human wildlife conflicts. Then we have seen the core zones, the buffer zone, the transition zone, the eco-sensitive zones. Then we have seen this diagram. After that, the rise of this casualties and economic loss, and who are the most sufferer. What are the mitigation process and mitigation steps can be taken to avoid this kind of situation further, like solar fencing, GPS tracking, proper awareness programs. After that, the last topic is about water crisis, that how India is under 20% of population and holding only 4% of fresh water. Currently, we are under water stressed country, and we have multi-level bodies like union government, state government, and local bodies. So we have multi-level governance in which Jal Ministry, Central Water Commission, and the central ground bodies are there. And it was established in 1945. It was renamed in 1951, and then we have a headquarters in New Delhi. So this is one quick brief about today's session. I hope you like it. And after this session, you can download PDF from my Telegram channel. If you have any concern, query, please let me know in the comment section. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.